I'm here to share a wild story about how I lost my job because of kindness, and how it turned my life upside down in ways I never expected. So, I was working the night shift at this auto repair shop. It was a big operation that serviced a ton of high-end cars for this massive company. My job? Painting the cars. Not glamorous, but it paid the bills, or at least most of them. See, I've got a 6-year-old daughter, Emma. She's my world. But Emma's got some health issues, and her medical bills are a whole other story. Let's just say there's not a lot of room for error when it comes to our budget. Anyway, back to the shop. The boss there, Rick, was, well, let's call him perpetually pissed off. Nothing made the guy happy. If you clocked in on time, he'd find something wrong with your shoes or your attitude. His big thing was this rule: never leave your station. Ever. He didn't care if the shop was on fire, you stayed put and kept working. I'd always been the guy who followed the rules. I couldn't afford not to, you know. Emma needed me to hold it together. But one night, everything changed. It was a Tuesday night, and I was about halfway through my shift. The shop was dead quiet except for the usual hum of machines and the occasional clatter of tools. I was in my corner, masking off a car for a fresh coat of metallic blue, when I heard it, a scream. Not just any scream, but this gut-wrenching, blood-curdling howl. It was the kind of sound that makes your stomach drop. I froze for a second, paint gun in hand, trying to figure out what was going on. At first, I thought maybe someone had just dropped something heavy on their foot. It happens, right? But then I heard it again, louder this time. I turned to the guy working the station next to me, Dave, a grumpy dude who barely ever said 2 words to anyone. He just shrugged, like he hadn't heard anything unusual. A couple of the other guys glanced up, but nobody moved. That's when I realized, nobody was going to do a damn thing. The scream came again, followed by a muffled shout for help. It sounded like it was coming from the far end of the shop, near the storage racks. I couldn't just ignore it. "Do you hear that?" I asked Dave, louder this time. "Don't get involved," he muttered, not even looking up from his work. "Rick'll lose his shit if you leave your post." But I couldn't shake the sound. Whoever it was, they sounded desperate. Against every rule and every warning, I set down my paint gun and started walking toward the noise. "You're gonna get yourself fired," Dave called after me, but I didn't care. What I saw when I turned the corner stopped me in my tracks. So, I get to the far end of the shop, and there he is, a guy pinned under this massive metal panel. It looked like one of those parts for an industrial truck or something. The thing must have fallen off the rack when he was trying to grab something. The guy was older, maybe mid-50s, with salt and pepper hair and this sharp suit that screamed, "I'm way too rich to be here." His face was pale, and he was clutching his leg like it was on fire. Blood was pooling on the floor, not a lot, but enough to know this was serious. "Help me. Please," he gasped. His voice was shaky, like he was trying to hold it together but barely hanging on. My heart was pounding. I wasn't exactly a paramedic, but I couldn't just stand there. I knelt down next to him, trying to figure out the best way to lift the thing off him without making it worse. "Hey, hang tight," I said, my voice probably way calmer than I felt. "I'm gonna get this off you." I grabbed the edge of the panel and started to lift, but holy hell, it was heavy. I'm not a weak guy, but I was struggling. Just as I was about to shout for backup, I heard a voice behind me. "What the hell are you doing, Scott?" It was Rick. He stormed over, his face redder than a stop sign, looking like I'd just committed the ultimate sin. "I told you, don't leave your station. You wanna explain why you're screwing around with this guy instead of doing your damn job?" "Rick, he's hurt." I snapped, still straining to lift the panel. "He's bleeding." I couldn't just. "I don't care." Rick bellowed, cutting me off. "You're here to work, not play hero. The guy on the floor groaned, and I swear I saw Rick roll his eyes. It took everything in me not to lose it right then and there. "Help me lift this," I demanded, glaring at him. For a second, I thought he might actually refuse. But even Rick wasn't heartless enough to leave a guy pinned under a giant hunk of metal. Together, we managed to lift the panel just enough for the man to slide his leg out. He winced but gave me this grateful look that I'll never forget. "Thank you," he whispered. Rick, of course, was already over it. "Get back to your post. Now." I ignored him and stayed with the guy until the paramedics showed up. Rick was fuming, muttering under his breath about insubordination and wasted time. But I didn't care. All I cared about was making sure the man was okay. Little did I know, helping him was about to cost me everything. So the paramedics showed up about 10 minutes later. By then, the guy was conscious, but his leg looked rough, probably broken, maybe a sprain too. He thanked me again as they loaded him onto the stretcher. I could tell he was in serious pain, but there was this quiet dignity about him, like he wasn't used to showing vulnerability. As they wheeled him out, Rick turned to me with that "I'm about to ruin your life" look on his face. "Office. Now," he barked. I followed him, my heart pounding. I knew I was in trouble, but I still hoped maybe, just maybe, he'd cut me some slack. After all, I wasn't exactly slacking off, I just saved a guy from serious injury. Nope. As soon as we got into the tiny, cluttered office, Rick slammed the door and launched into a tirade. "What the hell were you thinking, Scott?" he yelled. "You've got one job, to paint cars. Not play doctor, not be a goddamn hero. Do you realize how much time you wasted? How much money that cost the company?" I stood there, fists clenched, trying to stay calm. Rick, the guy could have died. What was I supposed to do? Just ignore him? Yes. Rick shouted, like that was the most obvious thing in the world. "That's not your problem. You had a job to do, and you walked away from it. That's insubordination, and I won't tolerate it. You're seriously firing me for this?" I asked, my voice rising. "Damn right I am," he snapped. "Clean out your locker. You're done here." I couldn't believe it. After everything I'd put up with at that place, the long hours, the crappy pay, the constant stress, I was getting fired for helping someone in an emergency. "Fine," I said, my voice cold. "But you know what, Rick? You're a heartless bastard, and this place is a joke. I'm better off without it." I stormed out of the office, grabbed my stuff, and walked out of that shop for the last time. My coworkers just stared, some looking sympathetic, others too scared to say anything. I got in my car and sat there for a few minutes, trying to process what had just happened. I was pissed, yeah, but mostly I was terrified. How was I going to pay the bills? What about Emma's medical treatments? Little did I know, the man I just helped wasn't about to forget what I'd done for him. So, there I was, sitting in my car, still fuming and on the verge of a breakdown. I kept thinking about Emma, about how I was going to explain this to my wife, Laura. She's been the rock of our family through Emma's health issues, and I didn't want to let her down. I drove home that night, replaying the whole thing in my head. Part of me felt like I'd done the right thing, but another part couldn't stop second-guessing. Maybe if I just yelled for help instead of leaving my post. Or tried to get Rick involved before stepping in. When I walked into the house, Laura could tell something was wrong immediately. "You're home early," she said, her face full of concern. "What happened?" I told her everything, and she listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from shock to anger to sadness. When I finished, she just hugged me. "We'll figure this out," she said softly. The next day, I was still trying to figure out what the hell to do when there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I assumed it was a delivery or maybe one of the neighbors. But when I opened the door, my jaw practically hit the floor. It was him. The guy from the shop, the one I'd helped. He was standing there in a crisp suit and an expensive-looking overcoat, leaning on a cane. His leg was in a brace, but he still managed to look like he owned half the city. "Scott, right?" he said, offering me a smile. "I'm Robert. Robert Hastings. Do you have a minute to talk?" I was stunned. Yeah, sure. Come in." He stepped inside, glancing around the living room. I could tell he wasn't used to houses like mine, small, a little cluttered, with toys scattered around from Emma's playtime. "I wanted to thank you again for what you did last night," he said, his tone serious. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come to help. That was incredibly brave of you." "Just seemed like the right thing to do," I said, scratching the back of my neck. "Honestly, I didn't think twice about it." "Well, you should know it didn't go unnoticed," Robert said. "But I also heard what happened with your boss. Fired you for saving me? That's outrageous." I shrugged, trying to play it off, but I could feel the anger bubbling up again. "Yeah, well, that's Rick for you. Rules over everything." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "Look, Scott, I'm not just here to say thank you. I want to help." I blinked. "Help? How?" He smiled, and for the first time, I noticed there was something almost mischievous in his eyes. "Let's just say I have a few ideas. But first, tell me, how are you set for work right now?" And just like that, my life took another turn I never saw coming. So there I was, standing in my living room with Robert Hastings, the guy I'd pulled out from under a literal ton of metal the night before. And he just asked me how I was set for work, like he already knew the answer. "Not great," I admitted. "I mean, I've got bills piling up, a sick kid who needs treatments I can barely afford, and now I'm unemployed. So, yeah. Not great." Robert nodded, his expression thoughtful but calm. "Well, let me start with this. I'm a partner at Hastings & Company, a private investment firm. We handle everything from real estate to startups to philanthropy." I had no idea where he was going with this. Investment firms and philanthropy? Yeah, cool, but what did that have to do with me? "I don't say this to impress you," he continued, "but to explain why I have the resources to help people who've earned it. And you, Scott, have earned it." He pulled out a sleek business card and handed it to me. His name was embossed on it in shiny gold lettering, like something out of a movie. "Here's what I'd like to do," Robert said, leaning on his cane slightly. "First, I'll cover your daughter's medical bills, completely. I've got friends in healthcare who can make that happen without any red tape. Second, I want to offer you a job. A good one." I stared at him like he'd just told me I'd won the lottery. "A job? Doing what?" "Whatever you're passionate about," he said, smiling. "I know you've been painting cars, but that's not a long-term plan, is it? If you could do anything, what would it be?" I had no idea how to answer. No one had ever asked me that before, not in a way that mattered. My life had always been about survival, about doing what needed to be done to get by. "I don't know," I said honestly. "That's okay," Robert said, his voice warm. "We'll figure it out. For now, I'll get you into a position at one of my companies where you can learn new skills and grow. We'll tailor it to your strengths." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This guy didn't just want to help me, he wanted to change my life. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, still half skeptical. "I mean, you don't even know me." Robert's expression softened. "Because I know what it's like to need a break. When I was younger, someone helped me when I didn't deserve it. This is my way of paying it forward. And besides, you didn't think twice about helping me when I needed it most. That kind of character deserves recognition." I didn't even know what to say. Part of me wanted to jump up and hug the guy, but I settled for a simple, "Thank you." Robert smiled. "Don't thank me yet. We've got work to do." Little did I know, this was just the beginning of something even bigger than I could have imagined. A few days later, things were starting to settle. True to his word, Robert had already made moves. Emma's latest medical bill covered. He even sent over a specialist to evaluate her care plan and recommend treatments we hadn't even known were options. The man was a miracle worker. As for me, Robert had set up a meeting with one of his companies, a custom automotive design firm. They needed someone to oversee their new line of high-end, bespoke paintwork. He figured my experience could translate into something more creative and rewarding. I was cautiously optimistic. But then came the unexpected, and honestly, hilarious, part. I was at home, going over some onboarding paperwork for the new job, when my phone buzzed. It was Dave, the coworker who'd told me not to get involved that night. "Dude," he said, his voice low like he was trying not to be overheard. "You're not gonna believe what just happened." "What?" I asked, curious but not expecting much. "Rick found out who that guy you helped is." I couldn't help but grin. "Oh yeah? And he's losing his freaking mind," Dave said, barely containing his laughter. "Apparently, Robert Hastings is one of the company's biggest clients. Like, his firm sends a ton of business our way. Rick had no clue it was him under that panel. He thought it was just some random rich guy." I let out a sharp laugh. "Wait, so now Rick knows I got fired for saving the company's golden goose?" "Oh, it gets better," Dave continued. "Hastings called the owner. Not Rick, the owner. Apparently, he wasn't happy about how things went down, and now Rick's in the hot seat. Word is, the owner's pissed that Rick let someone like you go over something so stupid." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Rick, who'd fired me without a second thought, was finally getting a taste of karma. "So, what happens now?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. "No idea," Dave said. "But Rick's been stomping around the shop all morning, yelling at everyone. It's like he knows his days are numbered." I couldn't stop smiling after that call. It felt so damn good to know that the guy who tried to ruin me was finally getting what he deserved. But the best part? I didn't have to lift a finger. When Robert called me later that day to check in, I told him about the situation. He just chuckled. "Rick brought that on himself," he said simply. "And for the record, I didn't make the call to the owner out of revenge. I just wanted to make sure they knew the kind of person they'd lost when they let you go." "Still," I said, grinning. "It's nice to see karma in action." Little did I know, this wasn't the last I'd hear about Rick, or the fallout from that night. A week later, I was settling into my new job at the custom automotive design firm. The place was amazing, way more professional and creative than the shop I'd been working at before. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a shot at building something real. Emma was doing better too. The specialist Robert sent over had put her on a treatment plan that seemed promising. Laura and I were starting to breathe a little easier for the first time in a long time. Then, out of nowhere, Rick showed up. It was lunchtime, and I was sitting in the employee break room when one of the receptionists came in, looking flustered. "Scott, there's a guy here asking for you. Says his name's Rick." My stomach dropped. What the hell was he doing here? Curious, and more than a little annoyed, I went out to the lobby. Sure enough, there he was, standing there in his wrinkled button-down and cheap tie, looking like he'd aged 10 years in a week. "Rick," I said, crossing my arms. "What are you doing here?" He gave me this sheepish grin that didn't suit him at all. "Scott, buddy. I just wanted to talk. Got a minute? Buddy? Seriously?" This guy had fired me like I was garbage, and now he wanted to play nice. "Make it quick," I said, keeping my tone cold. Rick cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Look, I might have overreacted the other night. You know how stressful things get at the shop. I didn't mean to, let you go like that. It was a mistake. I raised an eyebrow. A mistake? That's funny, because I seem to remember you being pretty damn sure about firing me. Rick winced. Yeah, well, hindsight's 20/20, right? Anyway, I talked to the owner, and we agreed, we'd love to have you back. Same pay, same position. What do you say? I couldn't help but laugh. This had to be some kind of joke. You want me to come back? After everything? Why the sudden change of heart? Rick hesitated, and that's when I knew the truth. Let me guess, I said, smirking. This wouldn't have anything to do with Robert Hastings, would it? His face turned bright red. Look, Scott, the shop's under a lot of pressure right now. Losing his business would be a huge blow. And, well, it wouldn't hurt to have someone like you back on the team. I couldn't believe the audacity of this guy. You didn't give a damn about me when you fired me, I said. And now you want me to bail you out? Not a chance. Scott, come on, Rick pleaded, his tone desperate now. We've always had a good working relationship. Don't let one mistake ruin that. I shook my head, feeling nothing but satisfaction. Rick, you didn't make a mistake. You showed your true colors. And now, I've got a better job, better pay, and a boss who actually values me. So no, I'm not coming back. Good luck, though. You're gonna need it. Rick looked like he wanted to argue, but he must have realized it was pointless. Without another word, he turned and walked out, his shoulders slumped. As I watched him go, I felt a surge of pride. For the first time in a long time, I was standing up for myself, and it felt amazing. After Rick's pitiful attempt to win me back, I figured the drama was over. I was finally starting to feel like life was moving in the right direction. But, of course, Robert wasn't done surprising me. A couple of weeks later, I was settling into the new job. The team was incredible, supportive, creative, and actually fun to work with. I'd even started experimenting with new techniques for custom paintwork, something I'd always wanted to try but never had the freedom to pursue at the old shop. One afternoon, my supervisor called me into his office. I didn't think much of it, just assumed it was a check-in. But when I walked in, Robert was sitting there, grinning like he had a secret. Robert? I said, confused. What's going on? Take a seat, Scott, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I sat down, glancing between him and my supervisor. Am I in trouble or something? Robert chuckled. Not even close. I'm here to discuss your future. Okay, now I was really confused. My future? He nodded. You've been doing great here. Everyone's impressed with your work ethic, your creativity, and your attitude. And it got me thinking, why stop here? I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Well, Robert said, leaning forward, I've been keeping an eye on the shop where we met. Let's just say Rick's struggles haven't gone unnoticed. The owner's been looking to offload it for a while now, and I made an offer. As of yesterday, it's mine. I stared at him, stunned. Wait, you bought the shop? He nodded, his grin widening. And here's the kicker, I want you to run it. For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. Run it? Like, be the manager. Not just the manager, Robert said. I want you to be the face of the operation. We'll rebrand, focus on quality over quantity, and make it a place people actually want to work. You'll have full creative control, a significant salary increase, and a stake in the profits. I was speechless. The idea of going back to that shop, especially after everything that had happened, seemed insane. But running it? Turning it into something better? That was a completely different story. I don't know what to say, I finally managed. Say yes, Robert said, smiling. You've earned this, Scott. And I trust you to make it work. I thought about Emma, about Laura, about all the nights I'd spent wondering if things would ever get better. This wasn't just a job, it was a chance to rewrite my entire story. "I'm in," I said, my voice steady. Robert clapped me on the shoulder. "I knew you would be. Welcome to the next chapter." As I walked out of that office, I felt like I was floating. Life had thrown me one curveball after another, but for the first time, it felt like I was hitting them out of the park. And Rick? Let's just say I couldn't wait to send him his severance package. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Robert wasn't kidding when he said I'd have full creative control. He gave me the green light to make the shop into something entirely new, and I dove in headfirst. First order of business: a complete rebranding. The shop got a new name, Horizon Auto Works, and a sleek new logo that made it look like the kind of place you'd actually want to trust your car with. We upgraded the tools, reorganized the workspace, and brought in a consultant to help streamline operations. But the best part? I got to build the team. That meant hiring passionate, skilled workers who wanted more than just a paycheck. I even reached out to a few of my old co-workers, the ones who'd been stuck under Rick's thumb. Dave came on board, and it felt amazing to give him a shot at something better. Of course, there was one last piece of business to handle: Rick. As part of the acquisition deal, Rick had been allowed to stay on temporarily to assist with the transition. Translation: he was biding his time until he could figure out how to weasel his way back into power. But Robert and I had other plans. On Rick's last day, we called a staff meeting. Everyone gathered in the newly renovated break room, the atmosphere buzzing with anticipation. Robert stood at the front, smiling like a man who had everything under control. "I want to thank you all for being patient during this transition," Robert began. "Horizon Auto Works is more than just a new name, it's a new beginning. And none of it would be possible without Scott. He's the reason we're all here today." I felt a mix of pride and embarrassment as everyone clapped. But then Robert turned to Rick, and the mood shifted. "As for you, Rick," Robert said, his tone polite but firm, "your role in this company has come to an end. Effective immediately, you're no longer employed here." Rick's face turned beet red. "What? You can't do that. I've been here for years, this place wouldn't even exist without me." Robert raised an eyebrow. "Actually, it exists in spite of you. And now it's time for it to thrive. Security will escort you out." The room was dead silent as two burly guys appeared, ready to show Rick the door. He sputtered and cursed, but there was nothing he could do. As he was led away, I couldn't help but smile. Karma, once again, had done its job. With Rick gone, the shop flourished. Clients started pouring in, impressed by the changes. We landed a few big contracts, and the team gelled like we'd been working together for years. And me? I finally felt like I was where I was meant to be. With Rick out of the picture and Horizon Auto Works thriving, my life took on a rhythm I'd never known before. Work didn't feel like work anymore. It felt like I was building something real, something that mattered. The shop's reputation grew fast. Word spread about our high-quality work and fair pricing, and we started attracting clients from all over. Some of them were even bigger names than Robert's company, celebrities, car enthusiasts, even a pro racing team. It was surreal. The financial boost was life-changing. For the first time in forever, I didn't feel like I was one step away from disaster. We paid off old debts, started a college fund for Emma, and even went out to celebrate, a rare treat for our family. But the best part wasn't the money. It was what success meant for Emma. Thanks to Robert's connections, Emma had access to specialists and treatments we'd only dreamed of before. Her condition, while still serious, was improving. She had more energy, more smiles, and fewer hospital visits. Seeing her run around the backyard, laughing with her mom, was better than any paycheck. One evening, after we'd put Emma to bed, Laura and I sat on the porch with a couple of beers. You seem different, she said, smiling at me over the rim of her bottle. Different how? I asked, leaning back in my chair. Lighter, she said. Like you're not carrying the weight of the world anymore. I thought about that for a moment. She was right. For so long, I'd been in survival mode, just doing whatever it took to get through the day. But now I had a purpose. It's because we're finally okay, I said. For the first time, I don't feel like I'm fighting just to stay afloat. Laura reached over and squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you, Scott. You've worked so hard to get us here. You deserve this. I felt a lump in my throat. If anyone deserved credit, it was her. She'd been my anchor through all the chaos, never once complaining or giving up hope. Things kept getting better from there. Emma's health continued to improve, Laura started pursuing her dream of opening a small bakery, and the shop hit a milestone. We were booked solid for 3 months straight. But then came an unexpected twist, one that would test everything I'd built. Just when everything seemed to be going perfectly, life threw us a curveball. Isn't that always the way? It started with a phone call. One of our biggest clients, a racing team we'd just landed, reported that a paint job we'd done on one of their cars had started peeling after just a week. This wasn't some minor scuff either, the paint was coming off in sheets. I couldn't believe it. We'd poured so much effort into that project, and our work had always been top-notch. But this? This was a nightmare. I called an emergency meeting with the team. Everyone gathered in the shop, their faces tense as I explained the situation. We're not pointing fingers, I said firmly. Mistakes happen, but we need to figure out what went wrong and fix it, fast. We started retracing every step of the process. I worked side by side with the crew, inspecting equipment, checking materials, and reviewing protocols. That's when we found the problem, a batch of faulty primer. The supplier had sent us a bad product, and we hadn't caught it in time. It wasn't anyone's fault, but that didn't make the situation any less dire. We're going to make this right, I told the team. Even if it costs us. The next day, I called the client personally. I explained the issue, apologized profusely, and assured them we'd redo the paint job at no cost. To my relief, they were understanding, frustrated, sure, but willing to give us a chance to fix it. But that wasn't the end of it. The faulty primer had been used on several other cars, and we had to reach out to every affected client. It was a logistical nightmare, and the cost of redoing all those jobs was staggering. For a while, I wondered if the shop would survive. The financial hit was huge, and I worried it might damage our reputation beyond repair. But then something incredible happened. One by one, our clients started reaching out, not to complain, but to thank us. They were impressed by how we handled the situation, how we took responsibility and prioritized making things right. Word spread, and instead of losing business, we gained it. Robert called me a few weeks later. I heard about the primer fiasco, he said. Tough break. But the way you handled it? That's leadership, Scott. That's how you build trust. By the time the dust settled, the shop was back on solid ground. The crisis had been a test of everything I'd worked for, and we'd come out stronger on the other side. But the real victory wasn't just saving the shop, it was proving to myself that I could handle whatever life threw at me. The primer fiasco had left its mark, but in the end, it became a defining moment for Horizon Auto Works. It showed me, and everyone else, that the shop wasn't just another business. It was something special, built on trust, resilience, and the kind of values I'd always believed in but never had the chance to fully live out. Life felt more stable than it ever had before. Emma was thriving. Laura's bakery had taken off, and her cinnamon rolls had become a local favorite. The shop. It was busier than ever. We'd hired more staff, expanded our operations, and even started offering workshops to teach young mechanics and painters the trade. One afternoon, as I was going through some invoices in my office, I got a visitor. It was Robert. "Got a minute?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe with his usual calm confidence. "Always," I said, gesturing for him to sit. He settled into the chair across from me and smiled. "I just wanted to check in, see how you're holding up." I leaned back, smiling. "Honestly, I'm doing better than I ever thought I would. The shop's thriving, my family's happy, it's like I'm living someone else's life." Robert chuckled. "Not someone else's. You earned this, Scott. Don't forget that." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment before he leaned forward, his expression turning serious. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about the night we met. It's funny how one moment can change everything. If you hadn't made the choice to help me, against every rule, every consequence, we wouldn't be sitting here right now." I nodded, the memory still fresh in my mind. "Yeah. It was a risk, but I couldn't just ignore you." "That's what makes you who you are," Robert said. "You don't wait for someone else to step up. You do what's right, even when it costs you. That's rare, Scott. And it's why this shop is going to keep thriving, because it reflects you." His words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I'd been the guy just trying to get by, to keep my family afloat. I never saw myself as someone who could lead or inspire. But now, looking at everything we'd built, I finally started to believe it. Before he left, Robert shook my hand. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. As I watched him walk out, I felt a wave of gratitude, for Robert, for Laura, for Emma, and even for the struggles that had led me here. That night, as I tucked Emma into bed, she looked up at me with her big, bright eyes. "Daddy, are you happy?" I smiled and kissed her forehead. "I am, sweetheart. I really am. And I meant it. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that doing the right thing is never the wrong choice, even when it feels like the world is stacked against you. You never know who's watching, who's listening, or how far a single act of kindness can go. So if you ever find yourself in a situation like mine, here's my advice: take the risk. Do what's right. You might lose something in the moment, but what you gain could change your life in ways you never imagined." And that, Reddit, is how I went from a fired auto painter to the owner of a thriving business, and a better dad, husband, and man than I ever thought I could be. Thanks for reading.